I thought my family had gathered to celebrate my 68th birthday with the usual cake and forced smiles. Then my daughter-in-law Sarah stood up champagne glass in hand and announced with a triumphant grin that this would be my last meal in my own home. The brochures for Sunset Manor Nursing Home were already spread across my dining table like evidence of a crime I hadn't committed. I smiled sweetly, raised my own glass, and delivered the words that would shatter their carefully laid plans forever. 3 years had passed since Robert's funeral, and I still caught myself setting 2 coffee cups on the kitchen counter each morning. The second cup would sit there steam rising like a ghost of our 45 years together until I'd remember and pour it back into the pot. Our house in Fairfield, Connecticut had been our dream when we bought it in 1985. Now the colonial with its white shutters and wraparound porch stood as a testament to a life well lived, every mortgage payment made, every memory earned. The house wasn't just shelter. It was where Michael took his first steps in the living room, where Jennifer practiced violin in the den, until the neighbors begged for mercy, where David built his first science project on the kitchen table. Robert and I had poured our hearts into every inch of those 4,000 square feet, and now it was worth $1.2 million according to the last assessment. Not that I ever planned to sell. This was home. My days had found their own rhythm since Robert's passing. Tuesday mornings meant volunteering at the Fairfield Public Library, where I'd been organizing the children's reading program for 15 years. Mrs. Henderson always saved me a butterscotch candy at the circulation desk, and young Tommy Chen would race to show me his latest dinosaur book discovery. Wednesdays belonged to my garden, where my roses had won the Neighborhood Association prize 3 years running. The secret was bone meal and classical music, though I never told the competition that. Thursday evenings brought the book club to my living room. 8 women who'd become my dearest friends over the decades, sharing wine and wisdom in equal measure. We'd long ago stopped pretending we actually finished every book, but the conversation never suffered for it. Helen Morrison, our unofficial president, always said the real story was in the living, not the reading. Life had settled into these comfortable patterns until about 6 months ago, when things began to shift in ways so subtle I almost missed them. Michael, my eldest at 45, started dropping by more frequently. Not the usual Sunday dinners or holiday visits, but random Tuesday afternoons when he knew I'd be home from the library. "Just checking on you, Mom," he'd say, that new worried crease between his eyebrows that hadn't been there before. Sarah, his wife of 18 years, would tag along, her sharp eyes scanning my living room like a real estate appraiser. "You really should think about downsizing, Charla," Sarah mentioned one afternoon, running her manicured finger along my bookshelf. "All this dusting must be exhausting at your age." At my age, I was 68, not 98, and I could still outwork most people half my years. But I held my tongue, offering them tea in my good china like always. Jennifer started showing up too, which was odd considering she lived 45 minutes away in Stamford. My middle child had been distant since her divorce from Bradley 2 years ago, throwing herself into her marketing job and weekend wine tours with girlfriends. Suddenly, she was concerned about my affairs being in order. "We should really look at updating your power of attorney, Mom," she said one evening, spreading legal documents across my dining table. "You never know what could happen." The papers seemed standard enough, but something in her eagerness made me hesitate. I told her I'd have my lawyer look them over first. The flash of frustration across her face was gone so quickly I wondered if I'd imagined it. David, my baby at 39, had always been the dreamer. His restaurant, the Copper Kettle, was his latest venture, and I'd been nothing but supportive even when my financial advisor warned against lending him the startup money. But lately, his visits had taken on a strange quality. I'd find him in odd places around the house, measuring doorways with his phone, taking pictures of empty corners. "Just helping with insurance documentation, Mom," he explained when I found him photographing my china cabinet. "You should have everything properly cataloged. Perhaps I should have connected the dots sooner, but you don't expect betrayal from the children you raised." The first real warning sign came on a Thursday when I returned from grocery shopping to find my mailbox empty. Mrs. Patterson next door mentioned seeing Michael's silver BMW in my driveway earlier. "He said he was picking up your mail for you," she called over the fence. "Such a thoughtful son." But I hadn't asked him to collect my mail. I never did find those missing bank statements, though I called the bank and had duplicates sent to Helen's house just to be safe. The numbers were all fine, my retirement account's untouched investments performing well. Robert had been meticulous about our financial planning, and I'd continued managing everything carefully after he passed. The second warning came when I noticed things going missing. Small things at first. A silver picture frame here, an antique paperweight there, items that might simply be misplaced in a large house. But then my mother's pearl necklace vanished from my jewelry box. The one she'd worn on her wedding day that I'd worn on mine, that was meant for Jennifer on hers if she ever remarried. I mentioned it casually at Sunday dinner, watching their faces. Michael suggested I was getting forgetful. Sarah wondered aloud if I'd put it somewhere safe and forgotten. Jennifer didn't meet my eyes at all. That night, I called my old friend Margaret Sullivan. We'd known each other since our kids were in elementary school together, back before she became one of Connecticut's most successful estate attorneys. Over coffee the next morning, I told her about my concerns. "Trust your instincts, Charla." Margaret said, her kind eyes serious behind designer glasses. "In my experience, when family members suddenly become interested in an older person's affairs, it's rarely altruistic." She recommended a private investigator, James Morrison, Helen's nephew, it turned out. The world was smaller than we thought in Fairfield County. I hired him that afternoon, feeling like a character in one of our book club mysteries. But this was my life, my future at stake. What James discovered over the following months would have broken my heart if I'd let it. Photos of my 3 children meeting at Jennifer's condo huddled over documents. Michael accessing my computer while I was at the library trying password after password until he got into my financial files. Sarah on the phone with Sunset Manor, that premier assisted living facility that charged $8,000 a month and had a reputation for draining estates dry. They were planning to put me away. My children, whom I'd nursed through fevers and heartbreaks, taught to ride bikes and drive cars, sent to college, and walk down aisles. They were plotting to lock me up and take everything Robert and I had built. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First came my birthday and the ambush they'd planned so carefully. As I prepared my famous pot roast that morning, humming along to the radio, I had no idea that by evening everything would change. Or rather, I knew exactly what was coming, but they didn't know I knew. And that made all the difference. October 15th dawned crisp and bright, the Connecticut autumn painting my maple trees in shades of fire. I'd been up since 6, the way I always rose on special occasions, though this birthday felt different from the 67 that came before. My hands were steady as I seasoned the pot roast, but my mind raced with what the evening would bring. The meat sizzled as I browned it, filling the kitchen with the rich aroma that had always meant celebration in our house. I added the carrots and potatoes just the way Robert liked them, even though he wasn't here to enjoy them anymore. Some habits run too deep to break. By noon, the house gleamed. I'd polished the silver set the dining table with my wedding china and arranged fresh chrysanthemums from the garden as a centerpiece. Everything looked perfect for a birthday dinner, right down to the candles I'd placed in my grandmother's crystal holders. If this was to be a performance, then my stage would be flawless. Michael arrived first precisely at 5:30. He'd always been punctual, even as a child, setting his watch 5 minutes fast to ensure he'd never be late. Sarah followed him through the door carrying a bakery box that made my heart sink. For 30 years, she'd made my birthday cake from scratch. A chocolate layer cake with cream cheese frosting that had become family tradition. The pink box from Stop and Shop told me everything about how much this evening meant to her. "Happy birthday, Mom," Michael said, kissing my cheek with lips that felt cold despite the warm evening. He smelled of aftershave and anxiety, a combination I'd never noticed before. Sarah thrust the box at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I hope you like vanilla. They were out of chocolate." They weren't. I'd been to that same bakery this morning for fresh bread. The chocolate cakes had been lined up in the display case like soldiers, but I smiled and thanked her playing my part. Jennifer arrived 20 minutes later, her usually perfect makeup slightly smudged as if she'd been crying. She wore a black dress more suitable for a funeral than a birthday, and around her neck hung my mother's pearls, the ones that had gone missing. She must have seen me notice because her hand flew to them, a gesture of guilt so obvious it would have been comical if it hadn't broken my heart. "You look lovely, sweetheart," I said, embracing her. She stiffened in my arms. David came last as usual, bursting through the door with apologies about traffic on I-95. His restaurant closed at 4 on Tuesdays, but I didn't mention that I knew it had actually been shuttered for 6 months. His girlfriend Amanda wasn't with him, though they'd been inseparable for the past year. When I asked about her, he muttered something about them taking a break. Dinner began with stilted conversation. Sarah complimented the pot roast with the enthusiasm of someone fulfilling an obligation. Michael kept checking his phone, typing quick messages he tried to hide beneath the table. Jennifer pushed her food around her plate like a sullen teenager while David drank his wine too quickly, refilling his glass twice before we'd finished the salad course. "So, Mom," Michael finally said as I cleared the dinner plates, "we've been thinking about your future." "Here it comes," I thought, carrying the dishes to the kitchen with hands that wanted to tremble. I took a moment at the sink, staring out at my garden, illuminated by the security lights I'd had installed last month, the ones with cameras they didn't know about. When I returned to the dining room, they'd transformed it into a presentation space. Glossy brochures covered my grandmother's lace tablecloth. Sunset Manor's smiling seniors beamed up at me from propaganda designed to hide the reality of institutionalized aging. Sarah stood at the head of the table like she was pitching a business proposal, which I suppose she was. "Charla." She began using my first name the way she did when she thought she was being serious. "This is your last meal in this house. We've all agreed it's time for you to transition to a safer environment." The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. I sank into my chair, letting my face show the shock they expected, though inside I was counting down the minutes until Margaret would arrive. Michael jumped in, his lawyer voice smooth and practiced. "You've been showing signs of confusion, Mom. Last week you called me by Dad's name. You've been losing things. The doctor says it's normal at your age, but you need professional care." The doctor, his golf buddy Harrison, who'd already agreed to sign whatever papers they needed for a small fee. I'd seen the emails on Michael's computer when James had done his investigation. "I've already filled out the application." Sarah continued, sliding a folder toward me. "You can move in as early as Monday. They have a lovely room available in the memory care unit." Memory care. For a woman who could still recite all of Shakespeare's sonnets and balance her checkbook to the penny. The insult of it burned, but I kept my face neutral, even managing a confused, frightened look that made Jennifer finally meet my eyes. Mom, it's for the best," my daughter said, fingering those stolen pearls. "The house is too big for you. You'll be happier there and safer. They have activities and friends your age." "But what about my home?" I asked, letting my voice waver. David leaned forward eagerly. I've already talked to a realtor. The market's hot right now. We could get at least 1.3 million, maybe more. After we pay off the mortgage. There is no mortgage, I interrupted. Robert and I paid it off 10 years ago. The glance they exchanged was pure greed. No mortgage meant more money to split. I could practically see the calculations behind their eyes. Even better, Sarah said brightly. The proceeds from the sale will more than cover your care at Sunset Manor. You'll be set for life. Set for life in a facility that would bill my estate into bankruptcy while they lived off the remainder. I'd done the math. At $8,000 a month plus their extras and service fees, Sunset Manor would drain everything within 5 years. Conveniently, their financial assessment showed most residents didn't last that long. I need to think about this, I said, standing on legs I made shaky. This is so sudden. There's nothing to think about, Michael said firmly. He pulled out another folder, this one thick with legal documents. We've already had you declared incompetent. Dr. Harrison has been documenting your decline for months. The admission papers are signed. We're doing this because we love you, Mom. Love. The word tasted bitter as burnt coffee. I looked at each of my children, these strangers wearing familiar faces, and felt something die inside me. But something else was born in that moment. A cold, fierce determination to show them exactly who they were dealing with. I see, I whispered. Could I at least have dessert in my own home one last time? Sarah actually rolled her eyes. Of course, but we should discuss the packing. I've already started organizing your things. You can't take much to Sunset Manor, just a few personal items. I moved toward the kitchen, then paused. Oh, I invited someone for dessert. I hope you don't mind. She should be here any moment. The doorbell rang with perfect timing. Margaret always had been precise. I'll get it, I said, moving toward the front door with a stride that was suddenly miraculously steady. Behind me, I heard Sarah hiss something at Michael about unexpected guests. I opened the door to Margaret Sullivan, looking every inch the successful attorney in her tailored suit, carrying a leather briefcase that might as well have been a weapon. Her smile was sharp as a blade. Happy birthday, Charla, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. I hope I'm not too late for dessert. Perfect timing, I replied, leading her into the dining room where my children sat frozen like deer in headlights. Everyone you remember Margaret Sullivan. We've been friends since you were children. She's also the best estate attorney in Connecticut, but I'm sure that's just a coincidence that she's here tonight. The color drained from Michael's face. Sarah's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Jennifer's hand went to the pearls again, and David reached for the wine bottle with shaking hands. Margaret smiled at them, all the kind of smile that sharks give before feeding. So lovely to see you all again. I understand we have quite a bit to discuss about your mother's future. What fascinating documents you have spread all over her table. The birthday cake sat forgotten in its pink box as the real party began. The dining room fell silent except for the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, counting down the seconds of my children's comfort. Margaret settled into Robert's old chair at the head of the table, placing her briefcase beside her with deliberate precision. I excused myself to the powder room, needing a moment to center myself for what was coming. In the mirror, I saw not the confused old woman they'd tried to paint me as, but the steel that had always been there, inherited from my mother, who'd raised 6 children alone after my father died. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to the number James Morrison had given me. 15 minutes. I typed, then deleted the message thread. When I returned, Sarah was attempting to gather the Sunset Manor brochures, shoving them into her designer handbag with jerky movements. Michael had pushed back from the table, his attorney instincts clearly screaming that something had gone very wrong with their plan. Jennifer sat frozen, one hand still at her throat, while David poured himself another glass of wine with less than steady hands. "Please don't clean up on my account," Margaret said pleasantly. "I'd actually love to see everything you've prepared. Charla, why don't you serve that dessert while we chat?" I moved to the kitchen, my steps measured and calm. The chocolate tart I'd made this morning waited in the refrigerator, glossy and perfect. I'd learned the recipe from a French cookbook Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary. It seemed fitting to serve it tonight at another kind of anniversary altogether. As I arranged slices on my best dessert plates, I heard Sarah's voice rise in the dining room. "This is a private family matter, Mrs. Sullivan. I don't think—" "Oh, but it's not private at all." Margaret's voice cut through smoothly. "When you file legal documents declaring someone incompetent, it becomes a matter of public record." Fascinating reading, by the way. Dr. Harrison was quite creative in his assessment. I carried the tray back, noting how none of them would meet my eyes now. Good. Let them stew in their discomfort. I served each slice with the grace of a hostess who'd entertained for decades, using the good silver forks pouring coffee from my wedding china pot. "Now then," I said, settling back into my chair, "you were telling me about my confusion and memory problems. Please continue. I'm very interested to hear about all these incidents I don't remember." Michael found his voice first, though it lacked its earlier conviction. "Mom, you've been forgetting things. Last month you left the stove on." "Did I asked, tilting my head. "How strange. I don't recall that." "When exactly did this happen?" "September 10th. Sarah supplied quickly. Too quickly. "A Tuesday. We came by and smelled gas." "September 10th. I repeated thoughtfully. "But you were in Boston that week, Michael. That conference for your firm. And Sarah, weren't you visiting your sister in Vermont, I remember, because you posted all those lovely photos on Facebook? The look that passed between them would have been comical if it hadn't been so damning." Margaret made a small note on the legal pad she'd produced from her briefcase. "Well, maybe it was a different day," Michael said weakly. "Perhaps," I agreed. "What other symptoms have I shown? Do tell. I'm fascinated by this decline I hadn't noticed." Jennifer finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You lost Mom's pearls." I looked at the necklace around her throat, letting the silence stretch until she began to squirm. "Lost them. How careless of me. They look lovely on you, dear. When did you find them?" They were... You must have given them to me and forgotten." "Must I have?" I took a sip of coffee, savoring the moment. "How fortunate that you remembered. Though I don't recall you wearing them to Dad's funeral or to Christmas or to Easter dinner. In fact, this is the first time I've seen them since they disappeared from my jewelry box 6 weeks ago." Margaret's pen scratched across paper. Jennifer's face had gone the color of spoiled milk. David, emboldened by wine or desperation, tried a different tack. "Mom, the house is too much for you. Even if you're not confused, you could fall. You could have an accident. We're trying to protect you." "Protect me." I repeated the words like I was tasting them. "Is that what you call it? Tell me, David, how's the copper kettle doing? Business must be booming if you can afford to worry so much about my safety." He flinched as if I'd slapped him. We're just having a slow season." "Which season would that be? The one that started 6 months ago when the health department shut you down, or the season where you told your investors the money went to renovations instead of cryptocurrency?" The wine glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on my hardwood floor. Red wine spread like blood across the oak planks Robert had installed himself 30 years ago. Nobody moved to clean it up. "How did you—" He caught himself, but it was too late. "How did I know?" I stood slowly, feeling the power of truth straightening my spine. "Did you really think I was some doddering old fool who wouldn't notice her children plotting against her? Did you think I'd just smile and nod while you stole my home, my freedom, my dignity? Sarah found her courage, then her voice sharp with desperation. You can't prove anything. We have Dr. Harrison's evaluation. We have documentation. The court will side with us. Will they? Margaret spoke up, her tone conversational. Because I have here a notarized statement from Dr. Patricia Chen, Dr. Robert Kolowitz, and Dr. Margaret Anderson, 3 of Connecticut's most respected geriatric specialists. They examined Charla last month. Would you like to hear their conclusions? She didn't wait for an answer, reading from an official-looking document. Mrs. Charla Williams shows no signs of cognitive decline. Her memory is exceptional for any age. Her decision-making capacity is unimpaired. Any suggestion of dementia or incompetence is not supported by medical evidence. Those doctors don't know her like Dr. Harrison does, Michael argued, but his voice had lost all conviction. No, they don't golf with you, I agreed. They also don't owe money to loan sharks like Dr. Harrison does. Amazing what people will do for $30,000 to pay off gambling debts. The doorbell rang again. This time none of them moved as I walked to answer it, my steps firm on the floor I'd walked for 35 years. Behind me I heard Sarah whisper urgently to Michael, but the words were lost in the chiming of the bell. I opened the door to find exactly who I'd expected, though my children certainly weren't prepared for Detective Patricia Murphy and 2 uniformed officers to walk into their failed intervention. Good evening, Mrs. Williams, Detective Murphy said warmly. I apologize for interrupting your birthday celebration. Not at all, I replied, stepping aside to let them in. Your timing is perfect. We were just having dessert. Would you like some chocolate tart? The detective's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. Maybe after we finish our business here. I believe you're expecting us. Indeed I am, I said, leading them back to the dining room where my family sat frozen in a tableau of guilt and growing terror. Everyone, this is Detective Murphy. She has some questions about conspiracy to commit elder abuse, fraud, and theft. I believe you've already provided plenty of evidence tonight, but I'm sure she'd love to hear more. As the detective began to speak reading rights and explaining the investigation that had been ongoing for months, I picked up my coffee cup with hands that didn't shake at all. The chocolate tart was perfectly bittersweet on my tongue, just like this moment of revelation. The birthday cake in its pink box sat forgotten on the sideboard, vanilla, and store-bought a lie as cheap and obvious as the love they'd professed while planning to lock me away. But I had my own sweetness now, flavored with justice, and the knowledge that sometimes the best gift you can give yourself is the truth served cold with a side of consequences. Detective Murphy stood at the entrance to my dining room like justice personified her badge, catching the light from the chandelier. Behind her, the 2 uniformed officers filled the doorway, their presence making the room feel suddenly smaller. My children sat trapped between their abandoned desserts and their crumbling scheme. Mrs. Williams has been cooperating with our investigation for several months. Detective Murphy announced, her voice carrying the weight of authority. We've been building a case regarding conspiracy to commit elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and theft. Sarah started to stand, but one look from the detective had her sinking back into her chair. This is ridiculous. We're her family. We're trying to help her. Funny way of showing it, I said, moving to the sideboard where I'd placed a leather folder earlier that day. But please let me help you understand just how much I know about your help. I opened the folder, pulling out photograph after photograph. The first showed Michael at my computer, taken by the hidden camera I'd had installed in my study. The timestamp read 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday when I was volunteering at the library. His face was clearly visible as he tried password after password, the screen reflecting his determined expression. Ginger 1952, I said conversationally. That's the password you were looking for, Michael. my cat's name, and the year your father and I married. You tried 43 combinations before giving up that day." Michael's face had gone gray. "Mom, I was just checking my bank statements, my investment accounts, the deed to the house." I laid out more photos. "Yes, I know exactly what you were checking, just as I know you've been intercepting my mail for 6 months." The next photo showed him at my mailbox stuffing envelopes into his briefcase. Another caught him shredding documents in his car parked right in my driveway. The arrogance of it still astounded me. "Mr. Morrison is very good at his job," Margaret commented, referring to the private investigator. "Former FBI specializes in financial crimes. He found your digital footprint quite fascinating, Michael." I pulled out a bank statement, one of the many Michael thought he'd successfully hidden. "See this withdrawal attempt, $50,000 from my money market account. Denied, of course, because you're not an authorized user, but the attempt was logged, as were the 17 others over the past 4 months." Jennifer made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. I turned to her with the next set of evidence. "Now, sweetheart, let's discuss your contributions to this family project." The photos showed her entering and leaving my house at times when I wasn't home, using the spare key I'd foolishly let her keep. 47 visits in 6 months when you thought I was out. That's quite devoted for someone who claimed to be too busy to come to Sunday dinners. The next images were from the jewelry store's security footage provided courtesy of Mr. Goldstein, who'd been our family jeweler for 3 decades. Jennifer, clear as day, selling my mother's brooch, my anniversary bracelet, the emerald earrings Robert had given me for my 40th birthday. $12,000 total, I said quietly. "That's what my memories were worth to you." Mr. Goldstein called me after the 3rd piece. He was concerned someone was stealing from me. He was right. "I needed the money," Jennifer whispered. "The divorce, the lawyers, the gambling debts. I finished for her." "Yes, I know about those too. Amazing what a private investigator can discover. The casino has quite extensive records. $87,000 in the past 18 months. Were you planning to use my house sale to pay them off?" David hadn't said a word, just stared at the spreading wine stain on the floor. I saved him for last, laying out the evidence of his deceptions with the same methodical care I'd used to raise him. The Copper Kettle closed January 15th. I said, placing the health department notice on the table. "Rats in the kitchen, improper food storage, falsified inspection certificates. You never told me any of this when you asked for another loan in March." His shoulders shook. Whether from shame or fear, I couldn't tell, and found I didn't much care. "But that's not the worst part, is it?" I continued. "Tell me about the cryptocurrency investment you promoted to your staff. The one where you promised 300% returns. The one where you used their retirement savings and my loan as capital." "It was supposed to work," he mumbled. "Everyone was making money." "Everyone was losing money, and you knew it." I placed printed emails on the table, his correspondence with known scam artists. "You weren't duped, David. You were complicit. 8 people lost their life savings, including Maria, who'd worked doubles to put her daughter through college." Margaret cleared her throat. "The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit is very interested in those transactions, Mr. Williams. Cryptocurrency fraud across state lines is a federal offense." But I wasn't done. The pièce de résistance waited in a manila envelope at the bottom of my folder. I pulled it out slowly, savoring the moment like aged wine. "Now let's discuss your master plan," I said, spreading the documents across the table. "Sarah, you were quite chatty with your friend Linda about putting the old bird away. Did you know she recorded your lunch conversations? Apparently, she found your plans disturbing enough to contact Adult Protective Services." I pressed play on my phone, and Sarah's voice filled the room. "Once she's in the home, we can claim power of attorney. Michael knows a judge who'll push it through. 6 months max before we can liquidate everything. The old bat won't even know what hit her." The old bat. After 18 years of birthday celebrations, holiday dinners, babysitting her children when she and Michael needed date nights. The old bat who'd held her hand through 2 miscarriages and never once mentioned the $50,000 I'd given them for fertility treatments. That's taken out of context, Sarah protested weakly. Is it? Should I play the part where you discuss drugging my tea to make me seem more confused, or the bit where you laugh about me dying alone while you're shopping for beach houses? Detective Murphy stepped forward. Mrs. Williams, I think we have enough evidence to proceed. Dr. Harrison was arrested this morning. He's already provided a full confession about falsifying medical documents in exchange for payment. He what? Michael shot to his feet, lawyer instincts finally kicking in. He can't. We have attorney-client privilege. You're not his attorney, Detective Murphy said calmly. And conspiracy to commit fraud isn't protected by privilege anyway. He documented every payment, every meeting, every falsified report. Quite thorough for someone committing multiple felonies. The doorbell rang once more. This time I didn't need to answer it. Margaret rose smoothly, returning with another man in a suit who carried himself like someone who'd seen too many family betrayals to be surprised by anything. This is Mr. James Morrison, Margaret announced, the private investigator who's been documenting this case. He has a few more items to share. James nodded to me politely, then focused on my children with eyes that missed nothing. In addition to what Mrs. Williams has shown you, we've documented meetings at Jennifer's residence where you planned the details of this scheme. We have recordings, photographs, and witness statements from neighbors who overheard your discussions. He placed a tablet on the table, swiping through image after image. My children huddled around Jennifer's dining table, papers spread before them. Michael pointing at what looked like my will. Sarah highlighting passages in what appeared to be Sunset Manor's admission documents. David on his laptop pulling up real estate listings for my house. The planning began 7 months ago, James continued. Right after Mrs. Williams mentioned she was updating her estate plans. The timing wasn't coincidental. I stood then feeling every one of my 68 years, but also feeling stronger than I had in months. You want to know the truly pathetic part. If any of you had come to me, honestly told me about your problems, asked for help, I would have given it. I've always given it. But instead you chose betrayal. You chose to see me not as your mother, but as a bank account with a heartbeat. Mom. Jennifer started, tears streaming down her face, smearing mascara in black rivers. We never meant... Yes, you did. I cut her off. You meant every word, every plan, every lie. You meant to lock me away in a place that would drain my accounts while you lived off the proceeds. You meant to steal my home, my freedom, my dignity. The only thing you didn't mean was to get caught. Margaret spoke up then, her lawyer voice sharp and clear. What you also didn't know is that 2 years ago, Charlotte transferred the house into an irrevocable trust. She's the lifetime beneficiary, but upon her death it goes to several charities she's selected. You can't sell what she doesn't own. The silence that followed was complete. Even the grandfather clock seemed to pause in its ticking, as if time itself needed a moment to absorb the magnitude of their failure. But you said... Michael's voice cracked like a teenager's. At Dad's funeral, you said the house would always be ours. No, I corrected gently, almost pitying him despite everything. I said this would always be your home, a place you could return to when you needed comfort or love. But a home isn't about property deeds or bank accounts. It's about family, real family, who see each other as people, not opportunities. You forgot that. You forgot me. And in forgetting me, you lost the only inheritance that truly mattered. My trust, my respect, and my love. Detective Murphy nodded to her officers. We'll need to take statements from everyone. Mr. Williams, you'll need to come with us for formal questioning regarding the forgery and attempted financial fraud. Mrs. Williams, Sarah, you're also needed for questioning regarding conspiracy charges. As my eldest son was read his rights in the dining room where he'd blown out 35 birthday candles, where he'd announced his engagement, where he'd cried after his father's funeral, I felt something inside me break and reform into a new shape. Not harder, but clearer. Like a diamond formed under pressure, multifaceted and unbreakable. The evidence on the table told the story of months of deception, but what it couldn't show was the years of love that preceded it. Those memories I would keep separate from this betrayal, preserved like flowers, pressed between pages of a book I'd never open again. The chocolate tart sat untouched on their plates, its sweetness wasted on bitter tongues. But I'd had my fill of sweetness for one night. What I tasted now was freedom sharp and clean as winter air flavored with the knowledge that I'd protected myself when those who should have protected me had failed. The investigation was only beginning, but my part was nearly done. I'd played the fool to catch the fools, and the house of cards they'd built so carefully had collapsed with the truth's first breath. Tomorrow there would be lawyers and questions, and the painful process of cutting family ties that had already severed themselves. But tonight on my 68th birthday, I'd given myself the greatest gift of all, the proof that I was nobody's victim, nobody's mark, nobody's old bat to be caged and forgotten. I was Charla Williams, and I would write my own ending to this story, one, where the heroine saves herself and walks away whole. As the officers prepared to escort Michael and Sarah out, Margaret raised a hand with the practiced authority of someone who'd commanded courtrooms for 3 decades. Detective Murphy, if I may, there are additional matters that need to be addressed before you take them into custody, evidence that speaks to the scope of this conspiracy. Detective Murphy nodded, and I watched my children exchange glances of fresh panic. They had no idea how deep James Morrison had dug into their lives, how many stones he'd overturned to reveal the rot beneath. Margaret pulled out a fresh folder, this one labeled with Michael's name in her precise handwriting. Let's start with you, Michael. Your mother asked us to investigate suspicious financial activity. What we found goes well beyond attempted theft from her accounts. She laid out document after document, each one damning in its clarity. Brennan and Associates' financial records show discrepancies totaling $487,000 over the past 2 years. You've been moving client funds through shell accounts, billing for hours never worked, and charging expenses for vacations you claimed were business trips. Michael's carefully maintained composure shattered. That's privileged information. You can't. Your firm's senior partner, Richard Brennan, provided these records voluntarily. Margaret continued smoothly. Apparently, they've been conducting their own internal investigation for 6 months. They were planning to confront you next week, but given tonight's developments, they've agreed to cooperate fully with authorities. I stared at my son, this stranger wearing Michael's face. You were stealing from your clients, from people who trusted you. It's not stealing, he said desperately. It's borrowing. I was going to pay it back once we sold the house. Once you stole from me to cover stealing from them. I finished. The magnitude of his betrayal kept expanding like ripples in a poisoned pond. Margaret turned to Sarah next. Speaking of theft, Mrs. Williams, your situation is equally interesting. Your personal trainer, Marcus Webb, has been very forthcoming about your relationship. Sarah went rigid. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, Margaret said calmly. I'm stating facts. You've been having an affair for 14 months. You've charged $60,000 in gifts for him to credit cards in your husband's name without his knowledge. You've also been slowly transferring money from your joint accounts into a separate bank account Michael doesn't know about. She placed bank statements on the table, highlighted transactions telling their own story. But here's where it gets really interesting. You've been telling Mr. Webb that your mother-in-law is already in a nursing home. You've shown him pictures of houses in Florida, promised him a new life together once you get your share of her estate. You even put a deposit on a condo in Boca Raton last month. Michael turned to his wife slowly, his face cycling through disbelief to rage. You what? It's not what it looks like. Sarah stammered, but her protest died as Margaret produced printed emails between her and Marcus planning their future with my money. Oh, but there's more, Margaret continued relentlessly. You've also been in contact with a divorce attorney. The plan was to wait until Charla's estate was liquidated, take your share, then leave Michael. You've already hidden assets in your mother's name to avoid splitting them in the divorce. The wine stain on my floor seemed to be spreading, or maybe it was just the shadows as my family's secrets spilled like blood across the table. Jennifer had gone silent, knowing her turn was coming. James Morrison spoke up, his investigator's instincts sharp as a blade. Your gambling problem isn't just about casinos, Jennifer. You've been running illegal poker games from your apartment. High-stakes, unlicensed, crossing state lines, which makes it a federal issue. He showed photos of her living room transformed into a gaming den, tables covered in chips and cards, faces blurred, but the setup clear. You charge a house fee, take a cut of every pot. That's running an illegal gambling enterprise. Your players include several people currently under federal investigation for money laundering. They're just friends, Jennifer protested weakly. We play for fun. With $10,000 buy-ins, James asked. With one player losing his house last month. With you extending credit at 30% interest enforced by people who break kneecaps for a living. I couldn't breathe. My daughter, my little girl who'd played violin so beautifully, was mixed up with violent criminals. Jennifer, how could you? She broke, then sobbing into her hands. I got in too deep. I owed money to the wrong people. They said if I hosted games, they'd forgive the debt. But it kept growing, and I kept stealing from you to cover it, and then they wanted more games, bigger stakes. Which brings us to David, Margaret said, turning to my youngest. He hadn't moved since the wine glass shattered, just stared at the stain like it might swallow him whole. The copper kettle's failure wasn't just bad luck, she continued. You were selling substandard food, buying expired products, and relabeling them. The whistleblower was your own sous chef who got sick from tainted shellfish you insisted on serving. She produced health department photos that made my stomach turn. Filthy conditions, rotting food violations that spoke of willful negligence rather than mere oversight. But that's not why you really closed, James added. You were using the restaurant as a front for your cryptocurrency scam. The investment opportunity you pitched to your staff, your suppliers, even customers who trusted you. You knew it was fraudulent from day one because you created the fake platform yourself. More documents appeared. Code printouts, bank transfers, victim statements. 43 people lost a combined $2.3 million. Some lost their retirement savings. Maria Gonzalez, your prep cook, lost her daughter's college fund. She's working 3 jobs now trying to recover. The loan sharks you borrowed from, James continued. They're connected to organized crime. You used your mother's house as collateral without her knowledge, forging her signature on loan documents. They've been sending people to watch the house, waiting for their chance to collect. My blood turned ice. They've been watching my house. We've had undercover officers monitoring the situation, Detective Murphy assured me. You were never in danger. We've been building a RICO case against them for years. Your son's testimony will be very helpful in that regard. David finally looked up, his face streaming with tears. Mom, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this. Stop, I said, my voice harder than I'd ever used with any of them. Stop saying you didn't mean it. Every signature you forged, every lie you told, every person you cheated. Those were choices. Deliberate, calculated choices. Margaret wasn't finished. She pulled out one final set of documents, these showing communication between all three of my children and their spouses. The conspiracy to have you declared incompetent began 7 months ago, but the roots go deeper. You've all been discussing your mother's assets for years, planning how to divide them, spending money you hadn't inherited yet. She showed email threads dating back 3 years' casual conversations about when Mom goes and our share of the estate. They divided my possessions like vultures over carrion, Michael claiming the house Jennifer, the liquid assets David, the valuable antiques and art. You even created a spreadsheet, Margaret said, displaying the document on her tablet. Every item of value in your mother's house assessed and assigned. You updated it monthly as you noticed new purchases or gifts. The estimated total $2.7 million, not counting the house itself. I looked at the spreadsheet, seeing my life reduced to numbers in cells. The dining set where we'd shared thousands of meals, $15,000 assigned to Michael. My engagement ring, $30,000 for Jennifer. Robert's watch collection, $25,000 claimed by David. They'd even valued and divided my books, my garden tools, the quilts my grandmother made. You turned me into an inventory list, I said quietly. A catalog to be picked over. Not a mother, not a person. Just assets to be liquidated. There's one more thing, James said, pulling up security footage on his tablet. This is from last Tuesday when you thought Charla was at her book club. The video showed all three of them in my bedroom, going through my closets, checking jewelry boxes, photographing valuables. Sarah was trying on my wedding dress, laughing as she posed in the mirror. Michael was examining Robert's cufflinks with a jeweler's loupe. David was photographing the serial numbers on the safe I thought was hidden behind a painting. But it was Jennifer who broke my heart completely. She stood at my vanity going through the jewelry box, music box Robert had given me for our first anniversary. She wound the key, and even on the silent video, I could see the little dancer spinning to an unheard melody. Then she dumped out all the jewelry, sorting through it like a pawn shop owner setting aside pieces to steal. We were preparing for the estate sale, Michael said weakly. For after you locked me away to die alone, I finished. Yes, I can see how prepared you were. Detective Murphy stepped forward again. I think we've heard enough. Mr. Williams. Mrs. Williams, you'll need to come with us now. Ms. Williams. Mr. Williams, you'll be required to appear for questioning tomorrow morning. Don't leave town. As the officers moved to escort my son and his wife out, Sarah turned back one last time. For what it's worth, the cake was chocolate. I lied because I didn't want to spend money on you anymore. Even in confession, she couldn't resist one final twist of the knife. I watched them led away in handcuffs through the front door, where I'd welcomed them thousands of times with love and trust. The house felt lighter with their absence, as if their greed had been a physical weight on its foundation. Jennifer and David sat among the wreckage of evidence, looking smaller and younger than they had in years. But I couldn't find sympathy for the children who'd planned my imprisonment with spreadsheet precision. Get out, I said quietly. Both of you, get out of my house and don't come back. Mom, please, Jennifer started. I am not your mom. I said the words sharp as winter frost. Your mother was an ATM, a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed. That woman doesn't exist. I'm Charla Williams, and you're trespassers in my home. Leave now, or I'll have you removed. They fled then, David pausing only to grab his jacket, Jennifer clutching those stolen pearls like a lifeline. I listened to their cars start and fade into the night, taking with them 39 and 42 years of memories I'd never look at the same way again. Margaret and James began gathering the evidence, professional and efficient. Detective Murphy handed me her card, promising to keep me updated on the investigation's progress. But I barely heard them, lost in the echoes of birthday songs sung by voices I'd never truly known. The grandfather clock chimed 11 times, marking the end of my 68th birthday. But it felt like the beginning of something else entirely. A life where family meant choice, not blood, and where love was earned through actions not assumed through birth. The vanilla cake still sat in its pink box, lie upon lie in sugar and flour. Tomorrow I'd throw it away with the rest of the garbage. Tonight I had cleaning to do, starting with the wine stain on my floor and ending with the illusions I'd carried for far too long. My children had shown me who they really were. The lesson had cost everything but taught me more. Some educations come late in life, but they're no less valuable for the delay. And some betrayals, no matter how deep they cut, can't kill what refuses to break. I was still standing in my home, my name clear, my future, my own. They'd aimed for my destruction and achieved their own instead. If that wasn't birthday gift enough, I didn't know what was. The doorbell's chime cut through the heavy silence that had settled after Jennifer and David's departure. Margaret looked at her watch and smiled, a predator's satisfaction in her eyes. Right on time. The evening's not over yet, Charla. I opened the door to find Detective Murphy had returned this time, accompanied by 2 additional detectives and what appeared to be a federal agent, judging by the FBI credentials he displayed. Mrs. Williams, Detective Murphy said, "These are Detectives Chen and Rodriguez from the Financial Crimes Division and Special Agent Barrett from the FBI. We have warrants." Behind them I could see more officers at Michael's car, which was still parked in my driveway. They were conducting a thorough search, pulling out boxes of documents from his trunk. Sarah's designer handbag was already evidence tagged and bagged. "Please come in," I said, stepping aside. "Would anyone like coffee? It's been a long evening." Special Agent Barrett smiled kindly. "That would be wonderful, ma'am. This might take a while." As I prepared fresh coffee in my kitchen, I could hear Margaret briefing the new arrivals in the dining room. The scope of my children's crimes had attracted multiple jurisdictions, turning my birthday dinner into a major investigation scene. When I returned with the coffee service, using my everyday mugs now the good china seemed tainted, Agent Barrett was examining the spreadsheet of my possessions. "Mrs. Williams," he said, "the cryptocurrency fraud your son David perpetrated crosses state lines and involves victims in 7 states. We've been tracking this particular scam for months. Your investigation has given us the final pieces we needed." Detective Chen looked up from her laptop. "We've also frozen all accounts associated with your children as of an hour ago. Michael won't be able to access the firm's funds he's been stealing, and Sarah's hidden accounts are now evidence." "What about Jennifer's gambling operation?" I asked, surprising myself with how steady my voice remained. "Vice has been monitoring that situation," Detective Rodriguez replied. "Your daughter's apartment is being raided as we speak. We expect to make several arrests tonight." My phone buzzed. Helen Morrison checking if I was all right. News traveled fast in Fairfield, especially when police cars lined the street of the nice neighborhood. I sent her a quick reply that I was fine and would explain tomorrow. "Mrs. Williams." Agent Barrett said, "We need to discuss your safety. The loan sharks your son involved. They're part of the Torino crime family. While we don't believe you're in immediate danger, we'd like to arrange protection until we've made arrests." The Torino crime family. I'd lived in Connecticut all my life and never imagined those words would be spoken in my dining room. David brought organized crime to my doorstep. "Technically, they've been watching for opportunities since he defaulted 3 months ago," Detective Murphy explained. "That's why we've had undercover surveillance on your property. Officer Martinez has been your new neighbor across the street, and the landscaping crew that's been working the Henderson place, also ours." I thought of all the times I'd waved to the young man across the street, bringing him cookies when he'd first moved in. He'd seemed so genuine, thanking me and asking about the neighborhood. Another deception, though this one for my protection. Margaret's phone rang. She listened intently, then hung up with satisfaction written across her features. That was Richard Brennan. Michael's firm has agreed to full cooperation. They're providing 20 years of financial records. Apparently, Michael's theft goes back much further than we thought. He's been skimming since he made partner. How much? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Preliminary estimate over $2 million. $2 million. While he'd been planning to steal my $1.2 million house, he'd already stolen nearly twice that from others. The greed was bottomless, a black hole that consumed everything near it. Agent Barrett's phone buzzed with updates. Dr. Harrison is providing full cooperation in exchange for a plea deal. He's admitted to falsifying medical documents for 6 other families attempting similar schemes. Your case broke open an entire network of elder abuse conspiracies. 6 other families. 6 other mothers or fathers' grandparents who'd loved and trusted now, discovering that love was currency and trust was weakness. At least I'd caught mine before they succeeded. How many hadn't been so fortunate? There's more, Detective Chen said, looking up from her computer. Sarah Williams has quite a history we're uncovering. This isn't her first marriage, and her first husband died under suspicious circumstances. Fell down the stairs 6 months after adding her to his life insurance. The death was ruled accidental, but the insurance company flagged it as suspicious. I set down my coffee cup carefully, afraid I might drop it. She might have killed someone. The case is being reopened, Detective Murphy assured me. Given tonight's evidence of her planning and capability for deception, the cold case unit wants another look. My son had married a possible murderer. They'd sat at my table for 18 years, and I'd never known. How many times had she served me tea, brought me soup when I was sick? I thought of her joke about drugging my tea and felt nausea rise in my throat. Margaret's phone rang again. This time her expression darkened as she listened. Jennifer's in custody, she reported after hanging up. But there's a problem. When they raided her apartment, they found more than just gambling equipment. What did they find? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Drugs, significant quantities. It seems she was allowing dealers to use her games as a distribution point in exchange for clearing her debts. She's looking at federal trafficking charges now. My daughter, a drug trafficker. The words didn't seem real, couldn't possibly apply to the girl who'd played violin concerts and volunteered at animal shelters. But that girl was gone if she'd ever truly existed outside my hopeful imagination. Agent Barrett received another update. David Williams has been taken into custody at his apartment. He attempted to destroy evidence, but we recovered his computers. Initial analysis shows the cryptocurrency scam was more extensive than we thought. He created multiple fake platforms and personas. We're looking at potential losses over $5 million across all victims. $5 million stolen from people who'd trusted my son. People who'd believed his lies, invested their futures in his promises. Maria Gonzalez, who'd lost her daughter's college fund and now worked 3 jobs. How many other Marias were out there suffering because of my son's greed? I need to make restitution, I said suddenly, to the victims. I know it's not my responsibility, but... Charla, no, Margaret said firmly. Your children's crimes are not your debt to pay. The courts will handle restitution from their assets. What assets? I laughed bitterly. They were all counting on mine. They have nothing but debt and stolen goods. Detective Rodriguez pulled up something on her tablet. Actually, that's not entirely true. Jennifer's gambling operation was quite profitable before she started skimming. There's approximately $300,000 in various accounts. Michael has an investment portfolio we've located worth about $500,000, probably purchased with stolen funds, but still recoverable for victims. David's computers contain cryptocurrency wallets that our tech team is working to access. It was something, at least. Not enough to make victims whole, but perhaps enough to ease some suffering. I made a mental note to discuss with Margaret about setting up a victims fund, maybe contributing something myself. Not from guilt, but from human decency. Something my children had abandoned long ago. Mrs. Williams. Agent Barrett said gently, "I know this is overwhelming, but we need to ask about your late husband's death. Given what we've learned about Sarah Williams and her history, we need to verify there were no suspicious circumstances." The question hit like cold water. "Robert had cancer," I said firmly. "Pancreatic cancer. He was diagnosed, treated, and died within 8 months. Sarah had nothing to do with it." "Of course," he said. "It's just procedure when patterns emerge. We'll verify with the hospital records." But doubt crept in like poison. Robert's death had been expected, but still sudden at the end. Sarah had been so helpful during those final weeks, staying overnight managing his medications when I was exhausted. Always insisting I needed rest, that she'd handle his evening pills. "Check everything," I heard myself say. "Check all of it. I need to know." Margaret squeezed my shoulder, understanding without words that my world had tilted off its axis entirely. Everything I'd believed, every memory I'd treasured was now suspect. Had Robert's death been natural? Had Sarah seen an opportunity, even then playing the long game toward my eventual demise? The investigation continued around me as I sat in my kitchen drinking coffee that tasted like ashes. Phones rang with updates, computers clicked with new discoveries, evidence bags accumulated like monuments to betrayal. My birthday had become a crime scene, my family a criminal organization. By midnight, the full scope was staggering. Michael faced embezzlement charges, forgery, fraud, conspiracy, and potential disbarment. Sarah faced murder investigation, fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft charges. Jennifer faced illegal gambling, drug trafficking, theft, and tax evasion. David faced federal fraud charges, forgery, conspiracy, and potential RICO violations for his mob connections. My 3 children, whom I'd raised with love and values, were looking at decades in prison. The grandchildren I'd never have would be born behind bars if their parents even stayed together through trials and sentences. "There's one more thing," Detective Murphy said as they prepared to leave. "The house title search revealed something interesting. Your husband was very clever with that trust he set up. He included a provision that if any beneficiary committed a crime against you, they'd be permanently excluded from any inheritance, current or future. He protected you even from beyond the grave. Robert, my darling." Robert had seen what I'd been blind to. He'd known our children's hearts better than I had, planning for possibilities I'd never imagined. Even in death, he was still protecting me, still loving me with more wisdom than I'd possessed. The last of the officials left just after 1 a.m, promising updates and assigning officers to patrol my street. Margaret hugged me at the door, promising to return in the morning to discuss next steps. James Morrison shook my hand, telling me I'd been the bravest client he'd ever worked with. But I didn't feel brave as I locked my door and surveyed the wreckage of my dining room. Evidence markers, coffee cups, abandoned birthday cake, and the wine stain that had dried into the shape of a heart. Or perhaps a wound. I walked through my house, seeing it with new eyes. Every room held memories now tainted by tonight's revelations. The kitchen where Sarah might have poisoned my husband. The study where Michael had tried to steal my life savings. The guest room where Jennifer had cataloged my possessions for future theft. The basement where David had hidden who knows what during his visits. In my bedroom, I found they'd been through everything just as the security footage had shown. Drawers slightly askew, closet hangers not quite straight, the subtle disarray of invasion. But they hadn't found the safe. Robert had been too clever in its concealment. Inside, along with important documents and some cash, I found the letter he'd left me to be opened only in emergency. My darling Charla. It began in his careful handwriting. If you're reading this, then something has gone very wrong. I pray I'm mistaken, but I've seen shadows in our children's eyes that worry me. They love us, but they love themselves more. Guard your heart, my love. Guard your assets. And remember, you are stronger than you know. All my love, always Robert. Somehow he'd known it might come to this. The date on the letter was 3 years before his death, long before I'd noticed any signs. But Robert had always been the wiser one, seeing truth where I saw hope. I pressed the letter to my chest and finally allowed myself to cry. Not for the children I'd lost tonight. They'd been gone long before this birthday. I cried for the mother I'd been, who'd loved too blindly and trusted too deeply. For the family I'd thought we were. For the innocence that died harder than my husband had. But when the tears ended, I was still standing, still in my home, still myself, but clearer now, refined by fire into something harder and more precious. My children had given me an unexpected gift tonight. The knowledge that I could survive betrayal, fight back against conspiracy, and emerge victorious even at 68. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and consequences, investigations, and revelations. The unraveling would continue, threads of deception pulled until the whole fabric of lies fell apart. But tonight, in the small hours of October 16th, I was free. Free from illusions, free from false love, free from the prison they'd tried to build around me. The grandfather clock chimed 2, marking the official end of the worst and best birthday of my life. I climbed the stairs to bed, leaving the wine stain and ruined dinner behind. Let the evidence remain until morning. Let the ghosts of family haunt the empty chairs. I had survived my children's betrayal. Whatever came next, that truth would sustain me. Some people never learn how strong they are until strength is their only option. Tonight I'd learned I was titanium disguised as flesh diamond wrapped in wrinkled skin. They'd tried to bury me, forgetting I was a seed. Now it was time to grow into something new, something they'd never anticipated. A woman who knew her worth and would never again mistake blood for love. 6 months later, I stood in my empty house, sunlight streaming through windows I'd cleaned for the last time. The movers had taken the final boxes yesterday, and tomorrow Helen Morrison would receive the keys to her new home. The wine stain on the dining room floor had been professionally cleaned, leaving no trace of that October night when my life split into before and after. The trials had been swift justice, moving with surprising speed once the full scope of crimes became clear. Michael got 15 years for embezzlement and fraud, his legal career destroyed, along with his marriage. Sarah received 25 to life after investigation proved she'd indeed murdered her first husband. The prosecution presented evidence that she'd been slowly poisoning Robert too, though thankfully ineffectively. His cancer had taken him before her patient evil could. Jennifer accepted a plea deal for 12 years, cooperating fully with authorities to unravel the gambling and drug network she'd helped facilitate. David received 8 years for fraud, with additional time possible pending the RICO investigation. The Torino family members involved in his loans were arrested in coordinated raids across 3 states. Each had been given a choice before sentencing: accept responsibility and receive a small inheritance from their father's life insurance to start over after prison, or continue denying and receive nothing. To my surprise, all 3 eventually chose accountability, perhaps finally understanding that actions have consequences. Jennifer wrote first a tear-stained letter full of apologies and recognition of the pain she'd caused. not just to me, but to everyone she'd stolen from, gambled against, enabled in addiction. She'd started attending therapy in prison, finally addressing the emptiness she'd tried to fill with risk and crime. David's letter came next, detailing how he'd begun teaching literacy to other inmates, using skills I'd taught him as a child. He was working with the FBI to identify and return funds to his victims, accepting that restitution might take his lifetime to complete. Michael took the longest to write his lawyer's pride, the hardest to break. But when he did, the letter was raw with honesty about how success had become his god wealth, his worship and family merely stepping stones to more. He'd lost Sarah's betrayal in the divorce proceedings, learning how it felt to be discarded once usefulness ended. I read their letters without response. Forgiveness might come someday, but trust was extinct, a dinosaur that couldn't be resurrected by regret. They were my children in DNA only now. The love had to be earned anew, if ever. The investigation had revealed more victims than initially thought. Using Margaret's guidance, I established the Williams Family Restitution Fund with my own contributions. Not because I was responsible for my children's crimes, but because good people had suffered while I'd lived in ignorant comfort. The fund wouldn't make anyone whole, but it helped Maria Gonzalez's daughter start college, and that was something. "You ready?" Helen's voice echoed in the empty house. My dear friend stood in the doorway, her kind face wreathed in understanding. She'd been my rock through the trials, the investigations, the media attention that comes when a prominent family implodes spectacularly. "Almost," I said, taking one last walk through rooms that held 35 years of memories. "I just need to say goodbye." She understood, retreating to wait by the car. I moved through each room, remembering birthday parties and Christmas mornings, homework sessions, and family dinners. But I also remembered the recent past: Michael at my computer, Jennifer stealing my jewelry, David photographing my safes, Sarah potentially poisoning my husband. In the end, the house was just walls and windows. The home had been destroyed by those who should have cherished it. Selling to Helen ensured it would know love again, real love between her and her grandchildren who visited every summer. She'd already shown me plans for turning my study into a playroom, and I'd approved wholeheartedly. Let children's laughter exorcise the ghosts of greed. My new life waited in San Diego, in a senior community that I'd chosen myself for myself. Not because I needed care, but because I wanted community. Ocean Towers was nothing like Sunset Manor. It was a luxury development where active seniors lived independently while enjoying shared amenities. I'd have my own 2-bedroom apartment with an ocean view, a kitchen where I could still cook my pot roast, and a garden plot where my roses would learn to love California sunshine. The literacy program I'd developed had already been accepted by the community center. 32 students had signed up for my first session, adults, eager to unlock the magic of reading. I'd be teaching 4 days a week, with Fridays reserved for the book club I was already forming with new friends I'd met during my planning visits. And then there was Walter. I smiled, thinking of the retired professor who'd been courting me quietly for months. We'd met at the library years ago, bonding over biography recommendations and terrible coffee. He'd been widowed around the same time I'd lost Robert, and we'd found comfort in shared understanding of grief. When news of my family's betrayal became public, Walter had simply shown up with takeout Chinese and old movies offering distraction without judgment. He'd attended every trial day, sitting quietly in the back, being present without intrusion. When I told him about moving to California, he'd smiled and mentioned he'd always wanted to see the Pacific. He was flying out next week to help me settle in and to look at condos near Ocean Towers. We were taking things slowly, 2 people who'd learned that love was precious and shouldn't be rushed or assumed. But when he held my hand, I felt possibility blooming like my roses after rain. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Safe travels, dear friend. Remember, you're not running away, you're running toward." She was right. This wasn't escape, but evolution. I was 69 now, with perhaps 20 good years ahead if genetics and luck cooperated. 20 years to live on my own terms, to build friendships based on truth, to find love that didn't calculate my worth in dollars. I looked around the empty house one last time, then walked out without locking back. The October sun was warm on my face as I joined Helen by the car. She'd drive me to the airport where first-class tickets waited. A small indulgence I'd never have allowed myself before, learning that self-denial wasn't virtue when it came from misplaced guilt. "You know what today is?" Helen asked as we pulled away from the house. "October 15th, I replied. "My birthday." "Happy birthday, Charla. How does 70 feel?" I considered the question as familiar streets flowed past the window. 70 felt like freedom, like wisdom earned through pain, like standing on a mountain summit after a treacherous climb, breathing thin air that tasted of triumph. "It feels like beginning," I said. The drive to JFK took 2 hours, filled with comfortable conversation and playlist Helen had made titled Charla's Freedom Soundtrack. She'd included everything from Aretha Franklin to Lady Gaga, making us both laugh and sing along badly to songs about survival and strength. At the airport, she hugged me fiercely. "You call me when you land, and when you're settled, and whenever you need to hear a familiar voice." "I will," I promised, meaning it. Real friendship had survived where fake family had failed. The flight to San Diego took 5.5 hours. I spent it reading applications from potential students in my literacy program, making notes about individual needs and goals. One woman, Rosa, wrote about wanting to read bedtime stories to her grandchildren. A man named Marcus needed to pass his contractor's licensing exam. Each story reminded me why I'd chosen this path: to build up rather than tear down, to give rather than take. When we landed, I collected my luggage and stepped out into California sunshine that felt like a warm embrace. The Uber driver chatted pleasantly about the weather and traffic, normal conversation that felt extraordinary after months of legal proceedings and family drama. Ocean towers rose before me like a promise kept. 12 stories of elegant living with palm trees swaying in ocean breeze and the sound of waves as nature's soundtrack. The concierge greeted me by name, and maintenance had already moved my shipped boxes into apartment 8B. I stood on my new balcony watching the sun set over the Pacific in colors I'd never seen from Connecticut. My phone rang. Walter checking that I'd arrived safely. We talked for an hour about everything and nothing, comfortable silences filling spaces between words. That night I unpacked my most precious possessions. Not the valuable ones my children had cataloged, but the meaningful ones they'd overlooked. Robert's letters, photo albums from when the kids were young and love was uncomplicated. My grandmother's rolling pin seasoned by decades of pie crusts and pasta. The music box from my jewelry box. Jennifer had taken the jewelry but left the melody. I wound the key and watched the little dancer spin to Chopin, remembering the girl who'd given it to me. That Jennifer was gone maybe had never existed outside my hopeful imagination. But the music remained notes falling like healing rain over scorched earth. 3 months passed in a blur of new experiences. My literacy classes thrived, students progressing from struggling with sentences to devouring paragraphs. Walter had indeed moved to San Diego, finding a perfect condo 10 minutes away. Close enough for dinners and beach walks, far enough to maintain the independence we both treasured. We were walking on the beach one evening when he asked about my children. I'd shared the facts, but not the feelings, protecting myself with safe distances. "Do you think you'll ever forgive them?" he asked gently. I considered the question watching sandpipers dance at the water's edge. I've forgiven who they were as children. Those babies I held, those toddlers I taught to walk, those teenagers I guided through heartbreak. I've grieved them like deaths and let them go with love. But who they became chose greed over love, deception over truth, imprisonment over freedom. They saw my life as their inheritance and my love as weakness to exploit. I picked up a smooth stone, weighing it in my palm. I can forgive that eventually for my own peace, but reconciliation that would require trust, and they burned that bridge with their own hands. And if they change, people can change even in prison. Then they'll become different people, and I'll have to meet them anew. I threw the stone into the waves, watching ripples spread and disappear. But that's their journey to make, not mine to enable or await. He took my hand, understanding without more words. We walked back as stars emerged over the Pacific, each one a distant fire that burned without consuming. A year passed. Jennifer completed her addiction therapy and began counseling other inmates. David's victim restitution program had recovered and returned over $1 million. Michael started teaching legal ethics to prisoners, finding ironic purpose in his fall from grace. Their letters came monthly now, no longer asking for forgiveness, but simply sharing their growth. I read them, filled them, and continued building my new life. The literacy program expanded to 3 locations. Book club grew to 12 members. Walter and I traveled to Europe, seeing sites Robert and I had always planned to visit someday. I learned Italian cooking from my neighbor Rosa, taught her grandchildren to read, and discovered that families could be chosen as well as born. On my 71st birthday, I hosted a party at Ocean Towers Community Room. 40 people came, students, friends, neighbors who'd become surrogate grandchildren. Walter made a toast that brought tears and laughter in equal measure. Helen flew out from Connecticut, bringing news that my old house was filled with her grandchildren's joy. As I blew out candles on a cake baked with love instead of obligation, I thought about the birthday 3 years ago that had changed everything. The night my children tried to cage me had become the key to my freedom. Their betrayal, meant to diminish me, had instead revealed strength I'd never known I possessed. "Make a wish," someone called out. But I had nothing left to wish for. At 71, I had health, purpose, genuine relationships, and hard-won wisdom. I had a life built on truth instead of assumptions, choice instead of obligation, love instead of mere DNA. So instead of wishing, I gave thanks. Thanks for the betrayal that freed me from false family. Thanks for the strength to fight back. Thanks for lawyers who became friends and investigators who became protectors. Thanks for second chances and new beginnings that could bloom at any age. Most of all, thanks for learning that family isn't about blood or birth or obligation. It's about respect, honesty, and genuine care. It's about people who see your worth beyond your bank account, who value your presence over your presence, who love the person rather than the inheritance. I'd lost 3 children but gained a life. The trade was painful but worthwhile, heartbreaking, but ultimately healing. Some lessons come late, but late is better than never. Some prisons are disguised as families, and some freedom requires betrayal to recognize. At 71, I was finally fully free. Free to love without obligation, trust without blindness, give without enabling. Free to write the rest of my story with my own hand, in my own words, for my own joy. And that freedom that was worth every tear, every trial, every sleepless night that brought me here. Because in the end, the greatest inheritance we can leave or receive isn't money or property or possessions. It's the knowledge of our own worth, the strength to defend it, and the wisdom to share it only with those who see it too. That's the legacy I'd build now, One student, one friend, one chosen family member at a time. The party continued around me, laughter filling spaces where conspiracies once echoed. I reached for Walter's hand, squeezed Helen's shoulder, smiled at Rosa's grandchildren playing tag between tables. This was my family now, built on trust, maintained by choice, strengthened by honesty. My children had given me an unexpected gift that October night. They'd shown me who they really were, forcing me to discover who I really was in return: a survivor, a fighter, a woman who could bloom at 70 like roses in unexpected sunshine. Happy birthday to me indeed. Oh. I hope my story resonates with those of you who've faced betrayal from those you trusted most. Sometimes the hardest prisons to escape are the ones built from familiar faces and family obligations. But please remember, it's never too late to discover your worth, defend your dignity, and build a life of authentic love. If you've experienced similar situations or found strength in unexpected places, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What gave you the courage to stand up for yourself? How did you rebuild after betrayal? If this story touched your heart or reminded you of your own strength, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to hear more stories of triumph over adversity. And if you know someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to start over, please share this with them. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Remember, you are stronger than you know, more valuable than others might suggest, and worthy of respect at every age and stage of life. Until next time, may you find the courage to write your own story in your own words for your own joy.